Looks like I picked a really good time to turn this on. A train's going by. This video is about Native American slave keepers. Y'all didn't know Native Americans had slaves, did you? Well, first, that depends on where you're at, who you consider Native American, what period of time, and what function. Like, you look at the Aztecs. Yeah, they had a lot of fucking slaves. Not slaves like North America, even though much of their empire was on the North American continent. What I'm talking about are the folks up north, those considered completely uncivilized and barbaric. When we look at the civilizations of the South, we look at a lot of really nice structures, things that took a lot of time and a lot of ingenuity to build, you know. And, you know, every time that we look at something that's built like that, we just assume it's built on slave labor and not a labor of love, or not a military purpose built by soldiers. It doesn't help that we burned their entire history and culture. When I say we, do I mean we? No, I don't. You guys didn't go through with the Spanish missionaries and do all of that shit to any of those folks. That is, however, our history. And if we don't pay close attention to it, we're doomed to repeat it. I'm sorry, my allergies are especially bad today. My nose is clogged up. My balls are puffy, and I would like to say it's from the COVID, but it's not. When the War of 1812 came about, we already had quite a few generations of white settlers who had been taken captive. The Native Americans of that region didn't take captives. If they took you home, it's because they didn't want you to die. If you were working for them, they were working right next to you because it's something you both need. When I was up in Hardin, Montana, it was kind of similar to being homeless in the fact that people do talk about family a lot, a whole fucking lot. However, I'd never had any group or society ever accept me the way that the native folks of Hardin, Montana did. Those folks up there really did mean it. They really did treat me like a human being. And I told them about all the screwed up stuff that was going on and that I had to go through. And, you know, even though a lot of them that I was hanging out with were either on drugs or alcohol, they were still pretty rock steady. There's a big difference between what we consider slavery and this slavery that we're throwing around as if it was all types of slavery. What we live in today in Roman times, yeah, we are all living in the lap of luxury. But then again, all of our stuff is cheap crap. The Roman rental agreement is what screwed us as a country the most. The Roman rental agreement basically makes everybody a slave. There used to be a lot of places where if you lived there, then it was your house. But if nobody fucking lived there, you get to a house and it's obvious nobody has lived there in at least a decade. Yeah, that's your house. Go ahead and move in. It's not going to fucking kill anybody. When we read about the first settlers of Jamestown, we do read about some battles and stuff. But that was a different environment entirely than when the Spaniards came through and tried to wipe out all the Aztecs. It was also a different region. And the Aztecs, they have what we would consider traditional slaves. But I'm going through a lot of this stuff. I'm going through what's called the Indian Wars and the Second Indian Wars. There's, depending on who you ask, there's 4 to 6 Indian Wars, and in all of them we read about the brutality of the natives, but we don't want to talk about the brutality of the white folks. We always say white folks, don't we? During the biggest Indian war that we had, it was mostly Buffalo soldiers doing the fight. We went, well, we'll send these black folks to go kill these native folks. And of course, we'll send them there under the command of white people. With a history of that, who would want to be a part of it? But then again, we also have a history doing the exact same thing the other way. Look at the Civil War, 600,000. 600,000 Yankees gave up their lives. 600,000 Yankees died in the Civil War to try to make slavery illegal, and we replaced it with Roman proficiency. Damn. That's something about government proficiency. Government proficiency is a guy in the office doesn't see the repercussions on the lives of the people that he's writing down on a piece of fucking paper. When you, let's say you're a slave of the Iroquois, you're not actually their slave. Until you learn their language, you might believe so. But if you wanted to leave the Iroquois, if they took you home, they wanted you to be warm and fed. That's why they took you home. If there was a battle and they went and they massacred pretty much everybody in your regiment and they still took you home, somebody saw something good in you. They didn't keep prisons, they didn't keep jails. So they didn't keep prisoners. None of them. None of the Plains Indians, none of the northern tribes. Now, later on in their history, we do see a little bit of barter and trade with white settlers. I don't mean barter and trade as in we're going to trade our food for whatever trinkets you happen to have that's shiny, like we think about in the movies. I'm talking about during some of these battles later on, like the Cheyenne actually traded, and the Navajo also traded. They traded some of their soldiers for some of ours. But through most of it, that was just not going to happen. When we go back to the very beginning, we talk about Tecumseh. Yeah, he didn't take prisoners. He said there was no sense in fighting the same enemy twice. When you go from a system of slaves being owned by people, and some of those slaves might be owned by someone who you might consider a good person, or you might consider them a bad person because they own slaves. In the situation with the Native Americans, they were all good people, and you were only a slave mentally. And when you learn the language, you started to understand that. That's a lesson we all need to learn. We all say we can't do anything and use that as an excuse not to try. What can I do? It's just me. And you use that as an excuse not to try. And then we have all these examples of what happens if people do work together and they do try. And still, people say, well, they're not us. I'm going to make every excuse not to make an effort. I just want to bitch. That's all I want to do. I don't want to make any actual effort. I just want to complain about what's fucking wrong. You go back to the Bible. You look at the Hebrews. They had slaves. You look at how they're supposed to treat slaves. The Bible has very specific instructions for it. Now, in the South, did those slave owners follow those instructions that are in the Bible? No, they didn't. They just abused the parts where it says how you're supposed to treat a slave to say, see, it's ordained by God that I can own another human being. Holy fuck. That is all of Christian history. When the Colosseum went from being Romans who believed in a whole bunch of different deities to now Rome, their one and true religion is Christianity, the bloodshed increased like you wouldn't believe. The Colosseum, oh my God, like you've got a whole bunch of bloodthirsty Christians in the theater that, well, this is during the period that we get to read about how all of these past people were persecuting Christians. This was all written after Christians took over the Roman Empire. And I'm not sure if you guys noticed, but the Romans were very good at taking notes. And there's a lot of stuff that they wrote down very specific. There were also two periods of Rome. There was, well, three periods. There was the imperial, which didn't last long. They were the property of others for the most part. And then you had the Roman Republic. And then later on, you had the Roman Imperium. The Roman Senate no longer made any difference at that point. You were basically a formality. Except when it came to an emperor, that emperor was a formality until accepted by the Senate. However, the Senate would do whatever the soldiers wanted them to do because the soldiers would come into the Senate with knives drawn or swords drawn and say, hey, this is how it's going to be. But if you look at the laws that were in place, not just in the Bible and in Israel during the time that the Bible was written, but also the Greeks, the Romans actually had laws like if your slave was malnourished, you could be put to death. If you owned a slave and your slave was malnourished, you could be put to death. But then we read about people being captives of the Japanese, and we think World War II, the cruelty. But then we look back during their feudal era. If you were a prisoner, which you people weren't taken prisoner, if they took a Westerner prisoner, it's because they saw something in you. They wanted to learn something from you, or they wanted you to learn something so you could take it back and fucking tell people. The Native Americans here, that whole family orientation of we're all brothers. Tecumseh did not like the American commander, and he still called him brother. Still called him brother. But if your brother is murdering people, what do you do? The settlers, a lot of what the natives did was to make agreements with us. The government would do this, 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 and this about the settlers, and the Native Americans would stop stringing them up in the woods, laying their skin off. Well, that's all stuff that they took from us. Who's us? Us who are alive today? No, from our ancestors. The French were the first ones to take scalps. The Haitians were the first ones to skin people alive. And this is stuff that we think of and we tell stories, and it's synonymous with Native Americans. You know? Now you're trying to make them out to be monsters for doing it back. White people did it to intimidate the fuck out of the Native Americans. So when the Native Americans did it back, it was just as equally psychologically damaging. Problem is that the settlers weren't going to listen to the American government, and they never did. A Greek slave had more rights than a woman in Greek times. Even if that slave was a woman, imagine that. The slaves, just like a male in Greek society, had his own Bill of Rights. A slave basically had their own Bill of Rights too. In Roman times, there was only a certain amount of time that you could keep somebody as a slave. And oftentimes it's because they didn't speak the language and you wanted to integrate them into your society. For the Romans, they were brutal. But you look at Josephus, they took him as a slave and he retired as a Roman historian. What's Josephus famous for? He's famous for being the Jewish general in charge at the siege of Jerusalem. That's right, from Jewish general to Roman historian. He died wealthy, very wealthy. We human beings have a bad habit of not seeing other human beings as human beings, and it's usually over trivial stuff. You were born somewhere different, well, automatically you lose a couple points of being human. You're a different gender than me. Well, I don't have as much of a connection with you because been trained and taught that we're completely different. So there's a couple less points for being human. You're a different color, might be a color or a nation that you're from, or that your ancestors are from, or you just look like you could have ancestors from a country where my ancestors were persecuted. I might hold a grudge. We're all slaves. The Romans and the Greeks had a Bill of Rights for their slaves for a reason. It's because they didn't like the idea of slavery. How fucked up is that? A lot of people say that the Romans didn't advance with a lot of steam and things like that because they had all these slaves. And when it all comes down to it, they did have a lot of slaves. A lot. At one point in time, there were 8 slaves in Rome for every Roman citizen. 8. And that didn't last very long. But that was also during the period of time where, well, now the Romans got a big head and they got this superiority thing, and now slavery in Rome has changed entirely. Basically, it went from looking at them as human beings and brothers to looking at them as cattle and sheep and pigs and beasts of burden. But like I said, that didn't last very long. See, the Roman people weren't all situated in this one Rome where all the rules were made. The city of Rome proper was not the same culturally as anything else in the Roman Empire. Most of the people elsewhere, their ancestors were conquered by the Romans. Now they're Romans by conquest. However, they do understand that their ancestors were Gallic, or their ancestors were Celtic, or their ancestors were Germanic. And yes, there were Germanic peoples who did come into the Roman Empire. Did Rome ever conquer Germania? No. But Germania was a made up name for a region that was invented by Julius Caesar. Anybody in that region, from the Teutoburg Forest on east, was German. He made up the name because he thought it sounded scary and imposing. The Native Americans had slavery downright. I mean, here you are, you just got done with a battle, you just got your ass kicked. And here's this person putting you on their pack animal and walking you to their camp. You're the one on the fucking horse. He's the one walking. How strange is that? Then you get to where he lives and he puts down a bed on the floor for you and starts cooking dinner. He's not treating you like a slave. He's not. He's not treating you like he just had a battle with you either, which is the part that's weirding you out. Traditionally, in European warfare, after a battle, you get captured. Well, things are looking real fucking bleak for you. You're not going to get treated like a human being. You'll be lucky if you get bread. And if it's got maggots in it, you should feel lucky because there's protein. You're not strapped to the place. You're not in a cage. You eat what they eat. You sit around the same fire that they do. I don't think that we should give the land back to the Native Americans. There's nowhere for all of us to go. I do believe that the Native Americans are the rightful government and the rightful governing body of this land. However, I say this because even to this day, with all of the shit that we have put them through and the shit ass land that we put them on and the fucking hell that we put them through, ignoring the things that are being done to them. Yeah, in general, Native Americans are fucking good to everybody. They don't like being backed into a corner any more than anybody else does. No human being likes being backed into a corner. I can't think of a single animal that likes being backed into a corner. Be it a praying mantis, or a dog, or a cat, or a rabbit, or a squirrel. But I do believe that if, especially with the frame of mind that has been present in the last 30 years or so, where a lot of Native American communities are, their differences were absolved and dissolved a long time ago. Now we've got different communities who are getting together like on social distance powwow. That's not just one particular tribe. It's people from all over, and it's not just Native Americans. There are contributors from all over. The idea of unity is not lost. The idea of family is not lost. And although you're not going to find perfection on a reservation, you're not going to find perfection in any Native American community, you're not going to find it in any community. So saying that we shouldn't model any of what we've got for our future after them, that's just stupid. Them, they, the Native Americans, the northern tribes. I gotta say the northern tribes in specific, because once you start getting south of New Mexico, you start getting into some pretty scary territory. And uh, another thing is, we don't tend to think of Native Americans living in anything but teepees. Their dwellings from one end of the United States to the other are so incredibly different in nature. I mean, you go to Washington State, those are longhouses, just like a Viking longhouse, and that's Washington State. That's on the wrong coastline to be Vikings. Also, there's proof that their longhouses have been there since before the Vikings were ever over here, so there's also that. We've got different grass lodges for different areas. We've got the pueblos and the mesas, um, completely different types of building techniques. The pueblo, that was stacked rocks, and they made round towers. You know, no mortar whatsoever, and a lot of that stuff still stands to this day. If you were a slave to the Native Americans during the time Tecumseh or forward up to right about the right about the Battle of Little Bighorn. At that point, it became a very different thing. Um, that really did change a lot of people's minds, and it really did change a lot of folks' perception of uh, trading prisoners as far as Native Americans went. It's almost as if they felt bad for killing Custer and his men. Like they went, well, it really does suck that basically we had 2,000 guys at a time that are able to were being attacked by 60 cavalry dudes. Yeah, they're not going to last long. When asked how long the battle lasted, one of those guys said, well, about as long as it takes for a hungry man to eat a meal. One of the stories that I was listening to, the reason that I brought it up is I'm obviously watching some stuff on the War of 1812, um, and it's talking about an American soldier who, well, the rest of his regiment, they were all in British custody, but they didn't have very many British soldiers to guard them. So the Native Americans came in and basically slaughtered all the soldiers, and told the British soldiers, "We're going to do what we want. If we want to kill them, we're going to kill them." Now, part of the reason for the Native Americans not taking prisoners was not having a place to put them. That's why they were killed. That's why their prisoners were killed. They just didn't have anywhere to put them. Now, in this particular case, there was a place to put them. They were already put there. But by that point, Tecumseh and his folks, they'd been they'd been through a lot. They had tried to remain civil. They tried to remain kind. They tried to share with the settlers, work with the settlers. They tried to make peace. When they joined sides with the British, it wasn't a thing where they wanted to be friends with the British necessarily. It's a matter of, all right, well, the people who are here are killing us, and here's this foreign folks that we've worked for and with before, and yeah, maybe they'll help us out. The War of 1812 had a lot more impact on a global scale than people really give it credit for. I mean, it's completely eclipsed by the Napoleonic Wars, and a lot of the stuff that we're teaching today, we're not teaching real history. Like most places that I go, you can't talk about Native American history without some asshole wanting to say that all Native Americans are alcoholics. Come on now. When I stick up for Native Americans, well, I get to hear people saying that very same alcoholic bullshit about the homeless. Only 25% of the homeless are addicts. And I get that that's a huge number. That's almost a quarter of them. But between 40 and 60% of the people in this town are alcoholics. That's just alcoholism. Anyway, I'm going to get back to this. I just went on a pretty decent long rant.